Welcome to South Florida Saltwater Fishing. I'm Heath, and it's Tips and Tricks Thursday. Alright folks, in this Tips and Tricks episode, we're going to go over some of the most commonly asked questions when it comes to leader when using braid. Before we get into this though, if you want to learn more about fishing, grow as an angler, or just see some great and exciting offshore fishing adventures, you can start by hitting the subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so that you won't miss a thing. Alright folks, so like I said, we're going to go over some of the most commonly asked questions about braid and leader. We're going to go over why you need to use leader with braid. We're going to go over several different applications of fishing when you use braid and what leader you should use. And we're also going to go over how to attach your leader to your braid when doing these applications of fishing. And hopefully after we go over and answer some of these questions for you, you will have a better understanding of the decision-making process of how to choose the right leader for when you're using braided fishing line. Alright, so we're not going to waste much more time. We're going to get right into this. Alright, so the most commonly asked question when it comes to using braid is, do I need a leader? Yes, you need to use a leader when you're using braid. There's a couple of reasons. Reason number one, braid is highly visible in the water to fish. So if you don't have a leader, you are definitely decreasing your hookup ratio, if not spooking every fish that comes within eyesight of your line and bait and terminal tackle. Next, a leader on your braided line, such as monofilament or fluorocarbon, provides shock absorbency. What that means is mono and fluoro stretch like a rubber band when a fish pulls against it. Braid has zero stretch, so a fish pulls against it and it goes nowhere. So let's say you get a hookup and you have no leader. You risk the chance of yanking the hook right out of the fish's mouth simply because it pulls, comes tight, and stops. When you've got monofilament or fluorocarbon, fish takes a run, you come tight, and it stretches, and then it retracts, just like pulling a rubber band and letting it go back this way. The monofilament or fluorocarbon will stretch and retract, and it will pull that hook back into the fish's mouth and help set that hook. And so that answers the question of, do I need a leader? Yes. Okay, and now the next area we're going to cover is different applications and tactics of fishing when you're using braid. We're going to go over tactics such as jigging, bottom fishing, trolling, both topwater and planar trolling, and deep dropping. Alright, so while we're discussing the tactics and what leader and what lengths to use, we're also going to go over the most appropriate way to fasten your leader to your braid. Alright, so the first tactic we're going to go over is jigging. Let's say you're out slow pitch jigging, or you're out vertical jigging. Regardless of what you're doing, you're going to need braid to do jigging. That's how jigs react properly, is by the non-give factor of braid. However, like I said, you do need a leader. The leader that you more often than not would like to use when jigging is fluorocarbon. However, I have found that using monofilament is perfectly fine. So when you're jigging, you don't need a 50 to 100 foot leader. You need maybe 15 to 20 feet at max. And so now when you are jigging, you're not going to hook your leader onto your braid with a swivel or anything. You're going to thread it directly on to your braid. Now there's a couple of different knots you can use. You can go with a blood knot, or you can go with my personal choice, which is the Alberto knot. The Alberto knot is basically a modified, more beefed up version of an Albright knot. And so this 15 to 20 foot leader on your braid for jigging gives you that shock absorbency. When you're jigging, you get a violent, strong strike and the fish goes in a negative fashion immediately, trying to retreat back to the ground. You need that shock absorbency to put the brakes on the fish and help set those hooks. And that's your basic choice when it comes to jigging. Like I said, you can go with fluorocarbon or monofilament. Personally, I would choose fluorocarbon. It's a little bit more stealthy and it will ensure that you get into the bite. The next tactic I want to go over is bottom fishing. Basic bottom fishing. You're anchored up, you're chumming, you're going for snappers, and whatever comes over the reef, some mackerels, who knows. You're going to need some stealth in your approach when it comes to bottom fishing because braid is very visible and reef fish are highly attentive to unnatural looking things, especially when they're feeding. This is my snapper spinner that I have loaded with braid. It's a Penn Battle 5000. When I'm bottom fishing with braid, I have at least a 25 to 35 foot leader of fluorocarbon. When you're bottom fishing, you're definitely going to want to go with fluorocarbon. It adds that stealth factor and almost ensures that you get into the hookup. Like I said, fish that are feeding over the reef and frenzied up are very sketchy. And again, that 25 to 35 foot shock cord is gonna put the brakes on that fish and set that hook. Remember that shock absorbency, that's what this is for. So when it comes to bottom fishing, it's a double-edged sword for the reasoning behind using fluorocarbon with braid. You've got the stealth factor and you've got the shock absorbency. So that's all the more reason to get a more lengthy leader on your braid when you're reef fishing. So when it comes to fastening your leader onto your braid when you're bottom fishing, you're also going to want to thread your leader to your braid somehow. Again, with either a blood knot or an Alberto knot or an Albright knot. All great knots, all very strong and non-abrasive. That's the key factor when it comes to a connecting point between leader and braid, is that it's non-abrasive. That's why you want to learn to thread the two lines together. Once you learn these couple of knots, they become second nature after you've done them a couple of times and you won't struggle to tie them at all. And that's reef fishing in a nutshell for you. Plain and simple. 25, 35 foot leader of fluorocarbon. Tied onto your braid, go for it. Get into that bite. And the next area that I want to go over is trolling. So there's a couple different types of trolling I want to go over. First would be topwater trolling. Again, here we are with my snapper spinner. I do troll with this a lot, inshore and offshore. I troll the reefs and I take it way offshore hunting down mahi. So when I'm trolling with light gear like this, I put a 75 foot top shot of fluorocarbon on it. So what I've got is 12 pound test mainline braid on this reel, and then my leader is 20 pound fluorocarbon from the company Seaguar. Now I know 75 feet sounds like a lot. Let me explain this. First, it gives me a great length of shock absorbency for when that fish hits, and it really lets it stretch, lets the fish take a nice run, helps me set that hook, and it ensures, that the hook's buried deep. That way when I get the fish, near, I can boat him, not really worry about the hook coming out. Now also, it plays another double-edged sword. When you're trolling and you're hitting pelagic fish, they have little teeth most of the time that are like sandpaper. So they're going to chafe up your leader right next to your lure. So this long leader allows me basically to not have to re-rig all day, and I can get back into the game rather quickly. So if I pull a fish in the boat, my leader's chafed up, I cut off a couple of feet and I get back at it. I retie the lure, get it back into the water real quick. And so if I do this way, I can slowly trim my leader away, and by the end of the day, if I've had an excellent day, I'm down to about 50 feet of leader, which is still plenty of shock absorbency for those big fish to hit. And with anything, we're using fluorocarbon, which adds a stealth factor, especially when you're trolling. And not to forget about our connecting point of our leader to our braid, we're going to do the same thing when we are trolling with light gear like this. We've got a 75 foot leader that's way out. It's attached directly to our braid. No swivel, no nothing. That way we can wind it all the way up and get the fish right to the boat without doing any hand lining or anything like that. Again, this is fastened with either a blood knot, an Albright, or an Alberto knot. And so those are some basic tactics where you connect your braid directly to your leader by threading it on. So before we go any further, what I want to do is I want to show you my go-to way for fastening your leader to your braid by threading it together without any terminal tackle or hardware. We're going to go over the Alberto knot. The first thing we're going to do is you take your fluorocarbon leader and you make a loop and you pinch the end of it. Next thing you do is you take your main line of your braid and you pull it through that loop. And you get about 6 to 8 inches of it. We have sent it from the front to the back of our loop. So we will bring our braid around the front side, and we're going to wrap it up over both lines, the tag and the main line of our leader. We're going to wrap it around there 6 to 8 times. So this is what you have. You have your braid wrapped on here. So as you can see, we're threading the braid onto the fluorocarbon. Now we're going to wrap back down the other way, wrapping around and in between those wraps that we just made, going back towards our loop. And you only have to wrap, you want to wrap about the same amount of times, keeping your wraps in between so it almost makes a cross hatch pattern. Now we are at this point, we have wrapped up and we have wrapped back. You want to make one more time where you send your tag, you want it to come out the same side as you sent your line in. So we will go from the back through the front, and then we're good. Now we're simply going to pull down on our leader in both directions and tighten it up. Trim up our tag end. You want a sharp knife, that way you can do it in one seamless cut. There's our tag end, and here is our Alberto knot. Alright, so that's the Alberto knot. Fairly simple. Like I said, tie it a few times, get comfortable with it. It's definitely doable out on the ocean when the boat's rocking and rolling a little bit, and it won't cause you too much trouble. Like I said, after you do it a few times, it'll be second nature, and you'll learn to perfect the knot, and you'll actually see inconsistencies with it, and you'll become more picky about how you like to tie it the further down the line you go. And the next type of trolling I want to go over is planar trolling. So what we've got here is a Penn International 30 spooled with 80-pound braid. When you're planar trolling, you need a very long leader. You need at least 100 feet of leader. So this is the leader that I use when I am planar trolling. What this is this is 100 feet of 60-pound monofilament leader. Now, I get this question sometimes, hey, do you use leader material or do you use monofilament? I'll be honest with you. It's both the same stuff until you get to the heavier weighted lines. If you're using 60-pound test, I'd say just get monofilament. It's the same thing as 60-pound leader. However, if you're using something like 150-pound test and you want leader, go with 150-pound test leader, not monofilament. They are different materials when it gets that heavy, and the diameter of the line definitely makes a difference. The composition of the line definitely makes a difference. And honestly, when you're planar trolling, using a monofilament leader does not affect your hookup ratio at all. You got a planer. That's a huge hunk of hardware right there. We need to get away from this thing. This thing spooks fish. I've heard people say they use a 10-foot leader or ask why I don't use a shorter leader, why am I hand lining in, all this stuff. Well, it's what I've been doing for several years, and I've found that that is the most effective method and length to get into the bite consistently and bring home dinner to the family. All right, now the next thing I want to talk about is how do I connect this leader to the braid? Well, obviously we've got a planer in between our braid and our leader. So on my braid, I've got a 300-pound swivel. The way you connect your swivel to your braid when it comes to this is you're going to want to use a Palomar knot. Now I actually double up my Palomar knot when I'm doing this application. Alright, and so that's the basics of your leader when it comes to planar trolling. You need a long leader. You don't need fluorocarbon. You can use monofilament. It's perfectly fine. You need at least a 75 to 100 foot leader when you're planar trolling. You got to get away from that hardware. So before we go any further, what I want to do is show you how to tie this double Palomar knot onto your swivel so that you can get going and hook it up and get underway, hook your leader on, and try and get into the bite doing some planar trolling. To do a Palomar knot, first thing you do is you make a loop. We're going to send the loop through the main line eye of our barrel swivel. The next thing you'll do is we will make an overhand knot just like this, and then we are going to make another one to kind of double it up and give it double the strength of your average Palomar knot. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the swivel and put it through the big outer loop and pull it all the way through. Then we are going to take the big outer loop knot and pull it to the top of our double overhand knots. Now we are going to pull this down tight and pull it all the way in so that it cinches up. And that is a double Palomar knot. Super solid knot. This is what I use for planar trolling. We are double wrapped around the eye, and the Palomar knot is a knot that cinches down on itself. It's a great braid knot because braid only gets tighter as you put negative pressure against it. Trim off our tag. And there you have it, double Palomar knot tied to a 300-pound swivel. And so that's the Palomar knot. Super strong, super effective, and you don't have to worry about that knot compromising itself hit after hit after hit after hit. It'll withstand the test of time. And so that's the basics when it comes to planar trolling your leader and attaching it all together. And the last tactic I want to go over, where it only makes good sense to use braid as your main line, is deep dropping. Here we have a Daiwa Tanacom 1000 spooled with 70-pound braid. On this, I have about a 25-foot leader of 40-pound monofilament. You might ask, hey, you don't need fluorocarbon? No, I would say you're good to go with monofilament, especially when you're deep dropping. You're dropping way down there, it's super dark. There's no light to refract through your line and make any sketchiness about it. You do need this shock absorbency. First, you've got a big heavy weight on a lot of times, anywhere between 2 and 5, maybe 10 pounds. So let's say you put your rod in free spool and your line starts dropping out and it gives you a little recoil. If you have your leader with your hooks or whatever hooked directly on, you risk the chance of snapping it off right on that recoil. You don't want that to happen. You want to have some shock absorbency from a leader. That'll give it some stretch and then let it smoothly sink the rest of the way down, several hundred feet down into the deep abyss. And the next good sense reason is the fact that we are fishing. Fish takes the bait, it hooks it, needs to stretch and set that hook, retract, pull that hook back up in that fish's mouth. Especially if you get something meaty like a nice giant golden tile fish or a grouper. You're gonna need that shock absorbency to help set that hook. And so now I wanna go over how you attach this. It's deep in your spool, 25 to 30 feet, so you need to thread your lines together. Of course, we're gonna go back to the Alberto knot, the Albright knot, or the blood knot. My preferential way of doing it is with the Alberto knot. It's tried and tested, and you can take on some real giant fish and the knot doesn't compromise itself. That is the basics of deep dropping. Yes, you need a leader. I would never go with tying my braid straight to a swivel and then hooking it directly onto my multi-hook setup. It's too risky, especially if you get a recoil and you lose a weight, which can be very expensive, along with your light and your multi-hook setup. It can be a showstopper. All right, folks, there you have it. The basics of using braid and why you need a leader, how to fasten it, and the different applications of when you're going to use it, when it makes most sense. You definitely need it for when you're jigging. You definitely need it for when you're deep dropping. I would say you more than likely would like to use it when you're planar trolling. All of these tactics are applicable when it comes to using braid. I would just say, understand why you're using braid, understand the best choice when it comes to leader decision making, and know the best method of how to make your connecting point. Alright folks, that about does it for this episode. Hope you had fun, hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned a little bit about how to choose the right leader for your braid fishing line. Till next time, South Florida saltwater fishing, going wherever the cool wind takes us.